All right, there we go. Welcome everybody to this year, our 2021 live stream extravaganza, the very first stream of the week. We have a packed schedule. As you may have just noticed on the screen here, we're going to be talking about the state of the filmmaking industry, kind of at large. And we have with us today Gary Adcock from Filmscape Chicago, our internal expert Matt Bach, and down in the corner there, over there, Ryan Connolly from Triune Films, or is it? I feel like I get that.
Yeah, Triune. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, awesome. Thank you guys for joining us today. I'm really excited. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I guess we'll just kind of jump right into it. Just a little bit, in case anybody doesn't already know. We'll kind of go around. It's clockwise for me, so we'll start with Gary, then we'll go to Ryan, and then Matt. Introduce yourselves. Give us a little background on who you are and what you do. So Gary, we'll start with you, Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary Adcock. I'm a Chicago-based consultant in the film and television industry. I actually sat, in addition to all of that, I sat as the executive director for an educational not-for-profit that's geared to train film and television people from the manufacturing side, based here in Chicago. Filmscape is a show much like Cinegear and everything, but we're kind of geared towards the manufacturing side and education for the rental community and people who actually work in film and television for a living. I personally consult for a lot of the manufacturers. I write about lens technology, camera technology, and just the state of the industry.
Cool. All right, thank you. And Ryan?
It's a little like Brady Bunch, you know?
A little bit.
I can't. I'm like stuck on that a little bit because you're like pointing to people like, oh, over here is. I'm Ryan Connolly. I'm the host and creator of Film Riot. I'm a writer, director, producer. I own Triune Films, which under that we create Film Riot and Variant, both two YouTube channels. Film Riot is a weekly how-to for filmmakers with, I guess, 12 years, I think now, 12 years running. With the goal behind Film Riot was always, in the beginning, I talk about it a lot lately, is our open was, you want to be a filmmaker, so do I, let's figure it out. So the idea behind Film Riot was always not to be, film instructors, but to, especially in the beginning, realize where we at. I was 5-6 years out of film school, still very green in a lot of ways. And, just publicly let me succeed and fail and show people how hard this is, how long this path is, and do short films publicly, try to do them and fail miserably publicly, which has happened, all leading toward getting into features and hopefully being able to show behind the curtain in a way that hasn't really before, with that sort of process from start to finish. So it's really just been, if from the beginning, just the idea of could we just, put people in the side seat with us who don't have access to these sorts of things and just let them come along from the ride, learn from our mistakes or, successes or failures. For the past 3 years, I've been pitching heavily, different feature projects and stuff. So that's been taking up more of my time since 2018 than most other things. But that's about it. So I guess writer, director, producer, host, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of hats stacked up there.
Yeah, got to.
Yeah, right on. And Matt.
I'm not nearly as interesting, but I with Puget Systems, but I do. In many ways, I guess you could say I'm kind of the ear to the ground for Puget Systems for the film industry. So I'm not doing any of this directly, but I'm really excited about this one because I get to pick your guys' brains on a lot of things that I've been wondering about. And then I take that knowledge and I disseminate to, the rest of the people at Puget Systems and, other people on, different areas. So that's me.
Awesome. Right on. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. And it's a little early for me. Gary and Ryan are Midwest, so they've been awake for a little bit longer, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just to start off, we had a few questions prepared, so we'll kind of jump into that. I'd like to start with this one question that Matt actually had come up with. With
we had a hack in the system
with the pandemic and everything. Obviously, it really kind of impacted filmmaking in a big way. People not being allowed to be close to each other and things like that. What are some of the things that changed during the last, year or two that you weren't really expecting to see?
Myself on camera.
A lot of people have said that.
You mean publicly or just Zoom meetings?
Yeah, I present publicly and I walk around rooms and talk to people and engage them when I'm trying to work. But to sit and stare at the box all the time, particularly since I don't have a prompter on mine and I'm not reading from up there, that was a mindset that I had to relearn.
Yeah.
And that was one of the toughest things I had to do, was actually stare into the box and talk to the eye, you know.
It's interesting from my end. It didn't really change too much because of the way that I've always done business. I started in Florida, so everybody I worked with was in California or New York, and now I'm in Dallas, and everybody I work with is in California and New York, mostly California. And there's some local people, but for the most part, the stuff I do, I mean, even on the other side of the world, the people that I'm working with on a normal basis. So I'm used to most of the stuff I'm doing through email, through Zoom. It's not a lot of, the type of stuff that Gary does. That's very random or rare for me, rather. But it was interesting how, the pitching side, how much it boosted. Because I'm not in production, it didn't really hit, that hard in a bad way. It kind of helped a little bit, which is, a weird thing to process because it's a horrible thing. But, because everyone was home and I'm in Dallas, it no longer is trying to, stack all these meetings for me to take a flight and then hit these meetings back to back and trying to get all these different studios and production companies to line up schedules for someone like me, and who they're like, who the hell is Ryan Connolly? Now it's a Zoom call that could happen at any time whenever they're available, and everyone was home. So it went from, it being very difficult to lock down these meetings that, because we sent around a sample and there was about 30 different places that responded and wanted to set a meeting, but then it was months and months and months of trying to set meetings. Then all of a sudden everybody's home and it was meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And even, for, the folks out in LA, they were saying to me that, it's so dumb that we haven't done it this way before, even doing meetings with people that are local. Cause it's like, now I don't have to go on the highway, and sit for an hour, for a 5-mile drive.
I don't have to go spend 45 minutes driving from Santa Monica to Burbank.
Totally.
It should take 5 or 50.
Yep.
It's an hour and 45 minutes to go from Santa Monica to Burbank or Burbank to Santa Monica.
Yeah. Because even when I would be out there physically, I would set all these meetings because, I'm here for 3 days. So I'd set all these meetings. And every time without fail, I'd have to cancel them because I always underestimate how long it's going to take me to get from point A to point B. So it ends up 6 meetings turn into like 4 at best. So everyone's just like, I don't know why this 30-minute meeting isn't happening over Zoom already. And I'm not spending 3 hours of my day just driving to a 30-minute meeting and back. So it seems like that's something that I mean, hopefully sticks, because it makes it a lot easier because I have a lot of friends that are doing larger productions, but they don't want to live in LA. They live either in California, but very much outside of LA, or in completely different states, or, one friend who lives in Canada and he'll have to fly in and, so it kind of shrinks that down a little bit, which I think is great. And I hope that does stay the same. I think now that bubble has been popped, I think, it's going to stick around because, even executives were saying how much they liked it and how dumb it was that it hadn't been done this way till now. So that's been like the biggest shift, that I've personally seen. But again, it's coming from somebody who's very much in the development phase right now, not in the production phase during all that.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. I've done more of this as an educator and teacher and that kind of thing. And it's interesting how many of the pitches have gone. The other thing that I've been doing a lot is because everybody's meeting this way, I've done a lot more meetings in odd time zones to connect with people in Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
It's not 9 to 5 anymore. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to be up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to do a conference call in Europe or Asia.
Right.
That's actually pretty common, or staying up late to 10, 11 o'clock at night and doing them that way because of how it works in other people's schedule. That's been one of the things that has really been unifying for me, because it allows me to connect with people all over the world. It messes with my schedule, but that doesn't mean that, it's not like we're chained down anymore. Or it's not like we don't have allocated a lot of time. Most of us don't have a commute time anymore. So we gain an hour or two every day, just ourselves, of time that we would normally use for other things.
Yeah. I've had to kind of like rebalance because it's like, we have a studio, and just going to the studio, you have your home and you have your studio, and that's where you work, and that's where you're home, and you live life, and you're with your family. And I've had to sort of, because I mean, that's the world I came from. I started, my studio was my home. And we've only really had a studio for 7 years now out of the 12 of just doing, Film Riot. And so that was like a weird separation of, wait, when I'm home, I'm not working. What is that? And so to come back to that has been kind of a hard, because I think I think most of us kind of obsess over what we do. Like this sort of field, this world is one, drenched in passion. So it's really hard to stop sometimes. So that's been a hard thing to try to rebalance of like, okay, now it's time slots, not places. Like having those separate places made it easy to like, psychologically break from one thing to the other.
And remembering to take a break between those time slots is really important.
Oh man,
it's like
that's
the
5
hardest. 10 minutes of jumping up and moving around a little bit and going to the bathroom, getting something to drink has become fundamentally important, where you didn't think about it before, because in the office you just got up and did it. And now you actually have to schedule it. If you're planning your meetings back to back, you actually have to think about that kind of stuff.
That's a good point. Do you guys find that there is a sort of pressure to be available at all times? Like you were saying, Gary, that it provides the opportunity to connect with people in different countries, different time zones. But do you feel pressured to take those early morning slots or late night slots?
I don't, and I work for myself and can pick my own schedule. I would be bothered by it if I was working a 9-to-5 job and my employer insisted on that in addition to my normal day. But because my time is my own, and I run multiple businesses. I've got my own private corporation plus the not-for-profit, and then I help other people do things for, I do charity work and all that. I think I plan my day out a little better. I don't mind getting up in the middle and doing it if it means I can get a hold of somebody differently than I would normally do it. I don't feel pressured to do it, but then I'm a production guy. My job is all over the place anyways. I'm one of those people who if I was still in IATSE, I'd been out stomping on the ground because, as a DIT, which is what I did on set, I was always the first guy on the set and the last to leave after everyone else. It wasn't uncommon for me to turn off the lights and shut down the stage by myself because I didn't want, an electrician or somebody to be hanging into the overtime if he didn't have to, or if he had to be there, 3 hours before me the next day to set up. You think about that kind of stuff. And production has always been a rather erratic schedule to begin with. It's one of the things that the union went on strike for, was to kind of, protect people's lives and livelihoods and being able to, get a normal night's sleep when necessary.
On all of this, so we're talking about production level. What about like in post, like being able to do all of these meetings and everything on Zoom? Do you feel that that's improving kind of the workflow between like different departments?
I think it's an acceleration of what's been going on. I think it's an acceleration of what's been going on with Frame.io's revolution and what those kinds of tools have been doing. I mean, because that started allowing a much more intimate collaboration in post. Even when you weren't there, you could actually leave a note at a time specific point in time, and that's been so fundamental that even companies like Dropbox have stolen it. And it's a fundamental way we have to work. We have to communicate. Too many times people assume that communication need to be in person. Now, that being said, having gone this incredible length of time being a solo flight, going into meetings physical with people is exhilarating again. I mean, it was really fun. I flew down to Dallas to do something at Texas Stadium and interconnected with the person I was meeting there because of something on their desk that would have never shown in a Zoom call. So it's like there's a difference that you can gain in knowledge of people that's not the blank background that I have hanging behind me. Mine's a canvas drop, by the way. It's not artificial. It's a real background.
I think like Gary said, like Frame.io has already been a huge thing, and I have a couple of friends in the post world that they hinged on that heavily. That's how they would send to their producer or the director. It wouldn't always be sitting specifically in the room. And from my world, that's been how I've always done it. My composer moved to LA only maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he's still in another state, but he used to be in England. So, that was that. My colorist is in another state. Everyone I work with in post, my VFX artist currently lives in England. Others are in LA. So everybody that I've always worked with are in completely different places than I am. So I've never really been able to sit down and do it. The only times that I have been is something like my short film Ballistic, when we had a decent budget to where we could budget that out, and I flew out to, you know, my editor to actually sit with him and do that. Because if you can be there live, especially when you're doing something like, you know, the color or the edit or the sound, being able to hit those nuances, similar to what, you know, Gary said about seeing something on someone's desk. It's, you know, those little, you know, things that you can't quite get in the moment. Otherwise he does an edit and he doesn't like it, and he goes back and I'm like, oh, well, wait, go back to what you were doing. Now if he's putting together an edit and sends it to me on Frame.io, I'm never seeing that moment of that, you know, that little spark of an idea that he abandoned, that I'm like, wait, no, I see where you're going. And we found really great things that way. So it's two heads being better than one, instead of me noting a final thing that he's trying to figure out what my thought process and intention is. We're in the room and we're melding as one. So I don't, you know, unless you do a live thing, which I have done and you can do, but even that is still too disconnected in some ways. But
because
before
of the delays.
Yes, the delays.
And this is something to bring up on that. It's a lot of this is it's the interconnectivity. We feel disconnected from it because of the delay in the signal. I mean, if you're waiting 5 or 6 seconds for a change to happen, and it takes, you know, another delay to get in there, it's those kinds of delays that you don't have, you know, that the person on the sending side is antsy about, and the person on the receiving side is frustrated by. And that's one of the things that's been really interesting for me, is start working with higher levels of technology to solve some of those delays. And that
cool.
And Ryan's right. I mean, there's a lot of disconnect, and there's so much that you can do in a community where you're interconnecting with the people you work with. And that's been a function of the film and television lifestyle for many years. I mean, we build families in this stuff. We all have this kind of thought process of doing it that way.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I guess it just depends on what portion, you know, of the pipeline I'm in. Like if it's in VFX, you know, I'm not going to sit over my VFX artist while he rotos for 5 hours. You know what I'm saying? So that's a different world. My composer, we get together, we come up with, and then I want him to go, and I want him to sink into the themes, and I want him to have freedom and not feel like I'm over his shoulder, you know? So I'll swoop in for stuff and then swoop back out. So that works really well with a remote workflow. But again, when it comes to things like sound or edit, it is great to be, you know, in the room, but I've done it more not in the room than actually in the room, and both have, you know, yielded results I was really happy with. And like Gary said, we keep going to a better and better and better place. A buddy of mine did the Frame.io cloud thing for his film Songbird, and he, you know, he really liked that immediacy of people aren't in the room, but he's getting text notes because they're watching things happen as they happen.
I think it's interesting that people haven't explored. There's other, you know, solutions that offer that. Queen.io, you know, the company from Gunlick Rowan, who's Microsoft system based on that, and how they're doing it. They use Azure for their cloud, actually, but he's been doing that actually longer than Frame.io was doing camera. And doing it, you know, in association with the European Film Commissions and the Norwegian government. But he's been doing a lot in China that way, where they've actually been shooting in China and editing in Europe, or shooting in Europe and editing in real time in China in the same way.
That's awesome.
And so there's other solutions out there. They're not, you know, Frame.io we talk about because we like it and everything else, but it's not the only solution out there. Particularly if you're outside the United States, always look for an alternative solution in your country, because there's a lot out there. There's at least 4 or 5 cloud solutions that I know of that offer that kind of tech right now.
Sure. There are some negatives that I have heard from a lot of friends that are in post, whereas some of these solutions, while awesome for someone like me, you know, I'm the director and I want to sit over the shoulder and be able to collaborate. Some of them have told me that it's been not so awesome to have certain producers being able to just pop into a live stream at any given moment and yell at them. You know what I mean? Sure. So it's like, okay, I could see how that, you know, it is, you know, reducing that ability to have the separation you need for certain things, to where, you know, you want to be able to push maybe this sort of person. Just give me a minute to do this, instead of them being over here. Where are you? Why are you not editing? I'm like, I'm getting coffee. You know? So there are those things too that come into play that I think will be interesting to navigate also.
Well, one of the things in production too is, I mean, you know, you've got the camera feed, but in a lot of instances you've got a witness cam too. So you're not just sending a single uplink. You're not just
Okay.
sending just the camera view. You're also sending a witness view, so you can see what's going on in set and how it's going to do.
Oh, yeah.
Or you've got the view around kind of information. So there's a lot of things that go on that require that. So if you start talking about witness cameras and a camera view, you're talking about two really high resolution, high quality bandwidth signals that you have to send out together. And and then you start talking about, well, what kind of connectivity do I have on set? What can I use? Where's my bonding? I mean, one of the things I always talk about when I talk about production is, do you know where your wireless is? If you're using wireless, are you sure you're comfortable that way? I was kind of joking with Houston when we came on. It's like, I do these things. I plug into an Ethernet jack on my laptop because, Wi-Fi just sucks.
Yeah.
and it's like, I laugh about those kind of things, but I'm amazed at the number of people that don't think about things like rebooting their router before they go on and do this kind of stuff. Pull the cable box, plug it back in, let it reboot. It'll give you a cleaner signal. It redefines its access to the network and it'll solve your problems. But people don't think about the other things that get involved. How the microphones have to be configured. If you've got everything on your production is wireless, I'm telling you that something is stepping on something else.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Well, just think about like back in the day, just like the old cordless phones. You could pick up like your neighbor's phone calls just because
Oh my
you
God,
were.
yes.
Or microwaves. Microwaves
so-
used to shut off cordless
Yeah.
phones instantly,
Sure. And so
because
why
it was
not?
right in the middle of the bandwidth that they allocated for, that specific frequency. Dead center in the middle of it's where microwaves fall.
Yeah.
We had a cordless phone that would pick up our neighbor's baby monitor,
Yep.
and we would hear into their room, like, oh, this feels wrong. But what are they saying?
Yeah, I know. I'm going to go back to the remote stuff because the one thing I'd love to hear from, I don't know if you guys could give this insight, but I'd love to hear a perspective of that question from a color, someone who's like pure color, because that seems like the one workflow that would be tough to do remote. Because like sound, VFX, you're sending them something, but color, like everyone's monitors are different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I have done it. And from an indie perspective, it's tough because you don't have the money to the best way. One of my friends, the way they do it is they calibrate a monitor and they send it to the client. And so that client's on the monitor
the
that
monitor.
they deem.
Okay.
Another one will use an
Sorry,
iPad.
guys. iPads. This is
iPad.
a color calibrated,
Yeah.
accurate display.
Uh-huh.
It's the only way to do it.
Yeah, and that's another friend. They just do it off of iPads, and it's like, do you have an iPad? No, they send them their iPad, and they just do it off of that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's really difficult, and you can't do it. And this is my one bitch about Android devices is that there's no calibration or no controls for the displays across all devices that's universal. So if you build a workflow, you have to build it to a very specific device in any environment to do wireless stuff like that. iPads just seem to be the easy one because they're pretty nebulous, and Apple really controls both the software and the color space on them very accurately. Probably more so than any other device I can think of. The iPad Pro in particular, the color balance and color controls on it are sophisticated enough to actually do HLG proofing on and view Dolby content. I mean, now that the Apple phone is producing Dolby content accurately reads on those devices. So if you're doing an HDR display and you deliver it in the very specific 420 Dolby codec that you can run in here, you can actually see incredibly accurately what's going on. And you're building a lot like you would do for anything else. You're building a lookup profile that's specific for that device so that device does exactly what you want it to do. That's the way you have to do any of those things. And Apple gives us one access there, but that's not the only solution. But the reality of it is it's probably one of the easiest solutions because of the number of devices that are available. So
yeah, well, and you can't get everyone on your production team or director or whatever to go out and get a Flanders Scientific or whatever and like do color calibration and everything. Because I mean, an iPad's not going to be perfect, even if they control it, because the lighting in your house and everything. But it's going to be better than whatever random thing they decide to watch it on, whatever monitor. Because man, especially like monitors these days, it seems like they all come by default like oversaturated, over vibrant, over bright,
over sharpened.
Yeah, just all these things that you can immediately go in and turn off.
Just over.
It's even worse on like TVs because like they have all that like the smooth stuff turned on, or I don't know, all that junk that like I feel almost a little bad whenever I'm like, you know, on vacation at like an Airbnb or something. Like, okay, I'm going to go into your TV. I'm turning all this junk off. Like,
That's
I
like
know it's
the
going to look
first
different to
thing
you,
at
but
a
it's going to be
hotel.
better.
Yeah, and the next person will love you for it. That's just remember that.
Uh-huh.
The next person will love you for it.
They won't.
Or they'll look and they're like, why are the colors so muted? But okay, off topic there. We'll get
But
back
that's
in.
the reality of it, though, and that's the thing is that because of the rules of standardization in our industry, there aren't any standards. We've got an output standard, but we don't have it, and we have a display standard, but nobody meets it. You know, and how many HDR monitors don't really show a full 10-bit signal? How many of them, you know, an HDR monitor is supposed to be a minimum of 1,000 nits? How many of them are? You know, there's a whole bunch of monitors that claim to be HDR that are 600 nits. Well, that's only 50% brighter than a normal television set. That's not HDR.
Huh.
And you don't think about those kinds of things in the colorist aspect, is trying to figure out how do I output to multiple different displays. That's why I say, when I had clients and we were doing remote proofing, I just bought the client an iPad and send it to them. $700 for a Wi-Fi only iPad meant that I gave them a device that was done, and it saved me $700 with a hair.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Not enough, I guess.
The iPad didn't come soon enough, I think.
Yeah, but that's the thing is you have to think about that. Sometimes you have to give away something, be able to prove to the client it does what it does.
Yeah.
But that's technology. That's the technology in the end game. That's not what we're talking about here, because we need to talk about development of build and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, and actually, can I kind of flip the question we asked before on its head? So we were talking about like what things changed, and like I think we've talked mostly about like the things that worked.
Yes.
Do you guys think has there been anything that like just flat out hasn't worked, especially since pandemic, but really like over the last 5 years? Anything that's like failed? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So if you can't, whatever. But anything that's like failed as far as like workflows. What was that, Houston?
I said 3D TV, and you said workflow.
Or 3D TV. No, I mean
I like
that stuff
3D.
too.
I made a lot of money in 3D. It was great. 2 cameras, twice as much hassle, twice as much post. It was a lot of fun.
Well, was it Sony?
And it was not supposed to be aligned. They're supposed to be offset to each other. What'd you say,
someone
Matt?
just released a camera for that again, like with the 2 lenses.
Well, see, and you're talking about the Canon lens for the R5 that comes. It's a very specific. It's an 8mm lens, dual thing that sets in the front, and it's designed for that immersive VR experience.
Yeah.
And think about that one a little differently than you thought about stereoscopic, because that kind of device is designed for the immersive world, for training, for knowledge base. I mean, think about wearing one of those and be working on, showing somebody how to sew up a wound if you're medical, or how to fix an engine if you're a mechanic. I mean, there's applications for that in the VR space that are really important for educational purposes and training purposes, not necessarily artistic. And remember that a good chunk of what we do is never, ever considered artistic. It's considered, menial things in film and television. So I looked at that one and kind of went, hey, okay, I get it. But then I had to, and to me, that was very much like Google Glasses. Google Glass was one of those things that's like, wow, that's a great idea, but they're trying to make it something it's not. It needs to be there. It needs to be, body cams for cops, clip on their glasses. It needs to be, that immersive thing so a medical technician can get immediate response from the hospital and see in real time what's going on. I mean, those kind of applications for Google Glass and emergencies to be able to do a matrix-like sharing of knowledge was a really interesting aspect of those, and much what a lot of companies are still working at with AR. That's kind of fascinating to me, is and having done a lot of work in AR, thinking about how they did things like being able to map blood vessels by colored light, which they caused. And now you can go in some places in the country that have problems with drug addiction, and they'll have blue lights or red lights up so you can't see your veins. And those are kind of things that are really interesting on how they took technology they were developing for medical and emergency uses, and then applied the reverse out to be able to help people in other places. I don't know. There's lots of kind of the technology that doesn't ever see mainstream, that still has functionality in a world that we may not be in.
Yeah, and I still feel like extension of what you're talking about, like Google Glass and stuff. Like, I'm still not sure about VR for passive entertainment, I guess is the way to say. Like watching something. I still think VR has a future in active things where you're participating, but I'm still not sold. Yeah, I'm still not sold on VR movies. I know a lot of people make a lot of attempts, but I'm still not sure about that. So I'm curious to see if you guys have any thoughts on that side of things.
One of the last projects I worked on before COVID in February of last year was real interesting because it was a training program for the Chicago Police Department that I got brought in as a data handler on to train police how to deal with people dealing with suicide. And it was a project that I was very much involved in. My brother died of suicide more than a decade ago. And it was one of those things that I was very much passionate about and how they were doing it. But it was like, the fascinating thing to me is, you did this camera view from all the different perspectives of all the individuals in there. And the actor had to do the same level of performance 8 times.
Wow.
And I don't know about you, but the fact that this guy was able to pretty much nail his lines, his sequence, his body movement, his positioning in this enclosed environment for 8 separate performances for every person's perspective in the room was really fascinating to me and showed an incredible quality of actor, but also somebody who really understood what the task was. I've yet to see the finished product though. Because I know it took them a long time to work it out because of COVID, but that I thought was a real interesting application for VR is, what happens from the different perspectives? How do you see what goes on when you're trying to help somebody who's in mental and physical trouble? So.
Yeah, I mean, from the passive, just film entertainment viewpoint, I'm kind of on your side of the fence on that. I don't know that would work for me. I mean, part of the excitement of sitting in a theater is you're sitting in a theater around people, and their reactions. And then I put a thing on and that's gone, that's taken away from me now. So, then you're just watching stuff at home, which is fine and great. And I do a lot more than I go to the theater, obviously. But, I think that communal aspect, we'll keep that from ever taking hold in a larger way than that aspect of it, but I could be wrong. I think the next generation is going to decide on that. Like, what do they gravitate toward, click onto, just like everything. But I don't know that would, I think it's, gimmicky, not in the, derogatory, way of saying gimmick, but as in it's a theme park ride, which is really cool. So are there blockbuster films that, do that for very specific reasons, and it's a specific gimmicky thing, like found footage movies? That's not every movie, but some movies it works with, and some people like them. And so that could be really cool, that immersive, hey, this story actually makes a lot of sense for this. But then you'd be, that's home entertainment. Obviously I don't think you would get theaters to come up with VR rooms anytime soon, but hey, maybe a world not where you put on goggles, but maybe a world where the screens surround you.
I don't know about that, Ryan, because I mean there's something going around now. There's this thing called the immersive Van Gogh, which is a multi-projector environmental thing of that, and then there's another company that actually makes pop-up booths that have 3D environmental stuff like that. So a lot of AR, VR combined. I think that may be more immersive in the future, particularly because of COVID, because it's a smaller group than we thought was.
I agree with that. There's even a VR experience here, but that's sort of the gimmick that I mean. Like, there's these specific things that totally work from that and will exist. And if there's a thing where without goggles, maybe specific, there's one theater that has like screens that wrap around you and you shoot it in that VR way, but it's projected onto all these screens. That's really interesting.
The Barco experience.
It's like, who knows?
Barco did that 5 years ago, and did that multi-panel environmental thing that they did that has been used, that actually was a precursor to virtual production. But Barco had been working on that technology for a while and had a thing that was literally floor, ceiling, and 3 walls that you step into, and it becomes the environment.
That's awesome.
It was a precursor of all of that.
Yeah,
this is really interesting. I mean, you talk about, and when we talk about amusement park rides and all of that. People need to understand that these are huge productions and use masters of visual effects. I mean, Sam Nicholson at Stargate's done them. Doug Trumbull did a half a dozen rides in his lifetime, and it's still consulting in that business. I mean, those are huge money makers for parks. But I think the AR VR world. I think look at what the new Star Wars is, where they've got the cars are smaller. Your groups of 6 or 8 people, 10. It's not these. You don't have 50 people in an event anymore. You've got 15 or 20 in small events moving through the projects inside these amusement parks. I think there'll be a place for it. I really see it more for educational and elemental stuff. I mean, I was working on heads-up displays and immersive 360 environments for the military, for pilots and UAV training and that kind of stuff 2 decades ago. That's nothing new in any of that. We were doing those with first generation, Thompson Vipers shooting map of the earth land mapping stuff with 6 of them hung underneath the helicopter. That kind of shit, like that was stuff that nobody ever thought of then, that we do now with Reds. And, you look at somebody like what Phil Holland does with his panoramic views, using, multiple Reds and stitching together these massive images that they then play back in 4K on lots of devices for the panel manufacturers are pretty stunning.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and like you were saying before, Gary, a lot of the work that you guys are doing is not actually in entertainment. There's a lot of the education, the corporate stuff, all that kind of jazz. And I do actually think though that VR will probably be very useful in those areas. I mean, education, especially if more and more people are doing things from home or whatever, like you can get so much more, immersed into whatever, especially like kids are learning about. Like, you can't take a trip to Rome, like you just can't do that. But hey, you can go and you can see the Sistine Chapel or whatever. I'm complete ignorance of.
How much of drones made that possible? I mean, that's one of the things about drones. I hate drones, but some of the shots they get of disaster footage or flying into a volcano to see lava splashing up or just that kind of stuff I find incredible, because they changed our human perspective on it as much as that stupid wire cam does in football that mimics what the games do. It's a great shot and I love it, but I think it's overused because it makes people want to think that they need to go back to Madden 2K or whatever and play a game rather than watching something in the real world. There's so much of this that is constantly evolving, though. I mean, 2 years ago, we would have never had a discussion about virtual production. Now it's on everybody's lip. And I mean, even today in the Hollywood Reporter, we were commented out earlier, the UK has announced that virtual production is now part of all curriculum in the UK for film and television production. And we're talking about something that 2 years, nobody had ever even heard of before. And fundamentally changed the way we do lots of stuff in television.
Well, so expanding on the virtual production stuff, like, do you think that someone who is in film industry today, how important do you think it is that they take some free classes on Unreal or and just kind of learn the tools, just get a basic familiarity? Do you think that's like important to do now? Or, hey, don't worry about it.
I think you should have already done it.
Need to.
I mean, I kind of joked. I run on all these people, and it's like I was on a documentary production that used a virtual set. We think it's one of the first documentary that's ever been shot in North America and maybe the world using virtual production technology. And one of the actors was a 6-year-old kid. And he didn't care anything about the camera, but when he saw computers and Unreal, he like gravitated to the world builder and spent half an hour picking the guy's brain. Cool. Because the kid understood enough about how the game engine worked to ask questions that were completely relevant to what we were doing. And I'm like, holy Lord, that boy is smart. And I think that the kids that are coming now are going to have a better understanding of it. It's harder for the old guys because they don't understand simple things like IP addressing and tri-level sync and, all those things that allow all of these devices to be in the same time base. I mean, people forget the camera's at 23.98, the computer's spitting out at 30p, and the wall is working at 59, 60 hertz, 94 hertz. And it's like all of those need to do that. And if you're talking PAL, it even gets more complicated because the computer still spits out 30p, but your camera's shooting 25 and your wall's working at 50. And it's like all of these things are, you don't think about how sync is a big deal, but it is. and just being able to lock a signal together so all of the devices understand what one is, that's a big deal.
And virtual production, though, it doesn't have to be LED walls. Like, I know that's a huge thing, especially at the upper ends. But like, I know there's a lot of people that are using Unreal for like their green screen stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
or
virtual sets. Like, it can be completely virtual. So, and like that is the area where I think people are really, no, there's a lot of experimenting going on everywhere. But that's the area where I feel like you're just like a single guy at home. It's like, hey, I'm going to make myself like a news broadcaster now. And they build a virtual set.
And I mean, that's going on right now. I mean, a perfect example of it is you watch the Rachel Maddow show or some of the Fox shows. They're up against the 105-inch TV, and that's their background. I built 3 miniature Unreal test engine sets using 75 or 105-inch television sets and model building. To be able to do that kind of stuff, because then you don't have to have much to Puget's dismay. You don't have to have a computer for every 12 feet of wall to be able to sync them together, and then another computer to sync them all together, and another computer to run the display, and another computer to run the Preforce server. And I mean, one of the things that people don't understand about how virtual production is that you basically have to have a couple of IT guys just to be able to handle the hardware needs of a production. I mean, the company that I work with, Miller Creative here in Chicago, we work out of Resolution Digital. I mean, all their systems are built by Puget, and it's interesting because we now run three main computers just to run the graphics, and then run another machine just to keep the 3 together in sync. So you don't think about that level, and each one's got 3 NVIDIA cards with SLI connectivity and blah blah blah. And it's the power of those kind of tools to push the wall the way you need it to. When you start getting into Mandalorian kind of stuff, I mean, you're talking about server farms to be able to make some of this stuff work, to be able to push the data as fast and as it's necessary for some of the technology that's out there.
Yeah.
Well, I was
going to say, Ryan. So Gary's got kind of like the high-end professional style. I was curious, Ryan, have you gotten into virtual production at all? Have you played with it in your thing?
And I don't.
And how do
necessarily...
you apply, or how does that go for more of your side of things?
Yeah, we've been toying around with it quite a bit at different levels, and I don't, I think from the highest end Hollywood level down to the indie is kind of the same answer. It depends. Like, do you need to do a class on it? Well, what kind of films are you making? What kind of filmmaker are you? Is Robert Eggers going to jump into Unreal? No, he's not. You know what I mean? He makes physical films with physical people in physical locations. For me, for a filmmaker like me, like, hell yeah. Like, I agree with Gary. Like, why have you not already? Like, you need to know these things, especially from the indie world. Like, certainly in the Hollywood, like, one of the things Gary mentioned it earlier, one of the things that like excites me most is the idea of reshoots, being able to, I don't have the money to go back to that location. Well, guess what? Bring it up on, the virtual production stage, and let's get the stuff we need. And I think
we did that before we went on the air. So just everybody understands is that.
I thought that was during.
There was a production in Chicago that was closing down, and they shot everything, and they needed to, because of timing on the stages, they needed to tear down their production sets. And traditionally, when you get done with a production, the sets stay up for a month or 2 or 3 afterwards in case there's reshoots. Mm-hmm. So what they did is we went in and mapped all these sets with the lighting as defined as the show, daytime set and nighttime set, and shot the 4 sets. And then they had them to go back and do inserts and drop-ins and those kind of things for production. And it saved an immense amount of money because it allowed them to spend a couple of days of photography, 3 days of photography to record all the sets, and then not pay 4 months of 70,000 square feet of production stage.
And in the indie world, that just means that reshoots are possible for the first time. When you're talking about the sub $10 million, going back to that place or having that set's gone, there is no option of keeping it around. So if we only could get this and that, we could tie these together. That becomes a thing now. But it's also just from the indie, like when I was 15 years old, crazy passionate, using whatever software that wasn't made for the thing because there wasn't anything available to people like me at the time to try to make a car explode or whatever, or create something. Nobody wanted to make anything with me. So how do I make something? Unreal unlocks all of that for these kids. And it's all free to start with. They just toy around with whatever, and you can start practicing, your composition, your scene construction, your pace spacing, your lighting, you know, things that you could never do before. So, I mean, that aspect alone is exciting, of the education that it can bring to the, you know, the younger kids who are passionate about filmmaking. But then,
I take it.
you know, when you get into actual indie filmmaking, there's a project right now that we're discussing that it's like, hey, this could be a feature that I could do while I'm out here pitching these other things. Here's something I could do on my own. And my brain goes to, you know, bigger films. That's the type of film I like to make: sci-fi, action, you know, horror, you know, things like that. So it's real hard to be able to do that at a budget, at a sub-5 budget, sub-2 budget. And, you know, we have an idea right now that we're toying around with. And the only reason we're even thinking about it is because of that world and what that could bring to the project, where it's like, well, okay, all we would need to build is this and this, and then we get these things, and then the rest we could do, you know, this way. So we're testing those things out. So it opens up, you know, blockbuster level filmmaking for indie filmmakers in a way that I haven't seen before, and is really, really exciting, even just from the preparation standpoint or pitching. Even if you don't have, you know, your project landed, I've used it for some pitching where I had a specific, like, hey man, like this moment is like a part, this is such an ingrained, like you need to see this moment to understand what I'm pitching you. I was able to create it. Or if we're doing, you know, even down to Film Riot, you know, like we don't, you know, we have our short films that we do where it's a full-blown thing. Then we have more like sketches, we call them, or scenes, where we just do a thing and then we're teaching around it. And we're wanting to do this mildly bigger thing, and we don't, you know, it's going to be a crew of 4 or 5, you know. So I stem from the 100-man crew to the 2-man crew, you know, and everything in between. So with 5 people, all this stuff that we need to get done, we're going to have to shoot it in a day. So I can go in and literally make the entire thing, you know, Hitchcock style from, you know, his films, where he would make the whole film on paper before he made it. But now in a way that, you know, and with animatics that was only available to studios, you know, just a few years ago. So just all those aspects, from, you know, from the education when you're young, to the pitching, to the actual development, to production, like all that stuff is just, it's really crazy what it brings. So I think definitely for young filmmakers, if you're not in it, what are you doing?
Kind of skipped over a little bit. Unreal is free.
Yes, that's the
completely
great
free.
And Quixel,
Windows,
Megascans.
It doesn't matter. It's free. Download it. Start learning. You know, learn how to connect things to it, learn how to build things in it, learn how to light things in it, learn how to do things. One of the, you know, and that's one of the things that, you know, it's a free tool that they give away for this technology. And I think it's fascinating. And there's a whole lot of the marketplace is free. You know, I think it's interesting because it allows you to work with developer tools and all that. One of the things I've been working on in virtual production takes lens data, you know, port on the side of the lens gives me fizz information, focus, iris, zoom, plus it also gives me shading and all kinds of other stuff, focal length and all of that. Being able to marry that kind of live information directly into Unreal, where you have an object that in the real world is controlling the virtual world, whether it's lighting or focus or anything else. That's where the power starts getting in this, because you start have that capability of marrying what the natural, what you're focusing on, and the artifice, and have them marry together. And you know, this brings up whole new levels of technology for everybody. It's art, it's, you know, 3D design, it's modeling, it's all of the things that you have to do to build cars and houses and homes and cities. You know, it's all the same tech. You know, lighting is the same if you're doing in architectural design as if you're doing studio design in those kinds of engines. And what's even more interesting is what, you know, NVIDIA seems to be doing with Omniverse, which is taking their, you know, architectural building and drafting tools, you know, AutoCAD and those kind of things, and building environments that can actually pass into Unreal and pass into the game engines to do that. That's fascinating too, because you start realizing that we're getting, you know, 100% accurate models for an automobile is now being used as the model for a production shot of a car driving by in the distance. And people don't realize that 90% of car ads are not real.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a device called a Blackbird that's just cameras and wheels that they change, and they put the wheels from the car and adjust the wheelbase to match, and then the camera shoots all the plates, and then they drop the car on top of this vehicle later.
It's really neat. I've seen the thing that they use to just paint over like any car. It's really
called
cool.
the Blackbird. Yeah, it's called the Blackbird. Yeah, and the guy who helped develop it is actually now the head of virtual production at Dimension Films.
Wow.
So it's like people who build these tools keep moving farther and farther and farther up in the industry. But Unreal has changed everything in such a short period of time. I wonder if the effect had been the same if we had the Mandalorian and didn't have a pandemic.
Yeah.
Where everybody could like dive into it. And it fundamentally,
I don't think so. I think things would have continued the way that they had been. It would have been a lot slower of an adoption.
See, I disagree with you, Houston. I disagree with that because I look back to Fukushima, which was 10 years ago in March. The earthquake happened and wiped out the reactor at Fukushima, but that earthquake also wiped out tape production in Japan and most of China. And it fundamentally drove us to digital overnight.
That's what I mean. Is without it, I think things would have continued. Without such a dramatic event, things would have continued along at the pace that they were going. It would have been kind of fun and cool because, oh, hey, Disney did it, but we don't have $10 million per episode to make this sort of thing. But like guys like Matt Workman and stuff, we're doing this sort of work kind of behind the scenes, and it was very indie, very like DIY in my garage sort of stuff. And if not for everybody having to be separated, and it just really exploded it. Now there was what is the cliche is necessity is the mother of invention, right? We needed a solution to keep people separate, and so this was it, and it blew up and became big mainstream.
I think it just accelerated the time frame. I mean, I think this is where we were headed regardless. I just think it made it faster out of, like you said, necessity, because I was already hearing the whispers of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends in the industry from Mandalorian, it was blowing their minds what was possible already. I think it was just, the same thing as the Zoom calls of just like, why didn't we do this already? It was gonna happen eventually,
I feel like there's people just like they have that comfort of, well, this is how we've always done it. And it takes something, either
you have to take a risk no matter what.
One person to just be like, you know what, I'm big enough in this space that I'm just going to do whatever I want to make it big, or the industry has to shift because what else are we going to do?
Well, the interesting thing about Mandalorian, and everybody talks about how it was groundbreaking and all this kind of stuff, but fundamentally forget that it was groundbreaking because it was the first Star Wars series that was live action.
Right.
And people would have watched that no matter what. So there's some of the, it's like the Marvel series that run, and Disney Plus is, I give Disney Plus a lot of credit for having, a series of Marvel and a series of Star Wars things, and actually understanding that this is what people wanted to watch and writing content that people wanted to see. I mean, The Mandalorian wouldn't be as good if you didn't have the baby, as inquisitive as it was. It wasn't Baby Yoda, it was Grogu. And but then you look at Falcon and the Snowman and Loki and WandaVision and how those shows have fundamentally energized the Marvel universe. And you look at what's coming for Star Wars with Kenobi and some of the other series that are coming, that's going to be really interesting. And you look at what Disney has on there as extras already, fly-throughs of the world. There's one on there that's just the sounds of Star Wars, which is fascinating if you go put it on. But there's also a whole section of Disney Plus that has nothing but screensavers. So there's Frozen screensavers, all these other kind of things that are 6 and 7 minute little looping things of just to put on, and I wish I could access them through my my interface to be able to have them loop without putting them on. But there's all kinds of the stuff in there, and that's that kind of content that has helped expand our how we look at content in the future.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a really good point as far as the content will drive it as well. Like if Mandalorian was trash, I don't think it would have been received like it was,
Well, and they brought it back episodics. Come on, we got into the Netflix world of downloading everything all at once and watching it, and they brought back, you have to go back and watch it on Wednesday or Thursday
HBO
or Friday.
Never left that. So like Game of Thrones, biggest series, so that never went away. But Netflix was really pounding on that door. So definitely glad that Mandalorian and stuff came back. I was like, let's give them a week, because I prefer that. Like I'm like, I can't binge everything, and now everybody knows it, and spoilers are everywhere.
Well, how many times
being as good as it was, I definitely helped push it along as well.
And how many times when you watched the show did you go back and watch the previous episode with the new one, just so you make sure you had all the points in the data line right?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
I miss those recaps. I love those last time ons. It's just so nostalgic to me, So I love when those are on any show. I'm like, remind me.
Well, I'll get it back a little bit to the technology of it, though. I've watched a couple of different things on Mandalorian and seen a couple of different like sessions on it. I was surprised though how much like on-set stuff they still had, like props and all that other kind of stuff. Like you don't think like, oh, it's virtual production, like it's all just this big LED screen. Like no, they used to have a lot of stuff in front.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's like VFX in a nutshell, right? Like if you want to really sell anything, 90% of the times you're marrying it with something physical. Certainly in the indie world, like if you can have, even if it's just there and it's a reference for the whole as a piece, it just anchors it in such a way that creates a really great, illusion that pushes everything much further. I think, also because that digital needs to rise up to the level of that physical, but also I think us just psychologically, those two things come together and it just makes everything feel, tangible in a way that it doesn't always without.
Yeah. So there was that side of it that I was surprised still how much like prop work there was. The other thing that surprised me was hearing how much they had to go back, rotoscope, and completely replace the background. Even after
because they didn't like them.
They had to do that a lot.
And you look at it, outside they're always on blue. They've always got blue drapes, and inside they've always have green drapes. And think about that one too, because it's like they didn't shoot on film. Why are they using blue? I mean, if they're shooting on DXLs and things like that, that's kind of not a camera that's really, likes having blue in it. So I kind of wonder about that because they still do a lot of practical effects. And a lot of it was just learning and understanding that. As that's gone forward, they're doing less and less interior green screen, blue screen stuff and more virtual production. And that's because of the capabilities. I mean, the screens got faster. They were able to refresh the screen rates higher to do things for the sword fighting and that kind of stuff. But think of the look they get from the LEDs on the lightsabers. That's a technology that didn't exist. That's only existed for the last 2 Star Wars movies. They didn't have the technology to make the lightsabers glow on a face. And I did stuff for Phantom Menace and remember going through round after round after round with Pantone colors, getting the color light on the lightsaber for Taco Bell ads. That's tough.
Oh, I lost the light.
No. Oh wow! It just died?
Yeah. Thank you for not saying you'll fix it in post.
We just brighten it.
That's live. Yeah.
But they all and that whole still having to replace the background that surprised me. But at the same time, they probably still don't have to worry about the lighting on the characters in the scene because it's probably close enough as long as they're not completely changing. If they're just oh, we don't like those boxes there. Hey, we're just going to quickly move them or whatever. But that's not going to change, especially like Mandalorian where there's a lot of reflections.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the advantages of all of this. And people need to think about virtual production more than just artifice in that way. I mean, it's a nighttime shot with a child that's not at night because you only have 6 hours and you can't drive them 2 hours to the location, those kind of things. It's an all-day sunrise so you can do languages and versions with different people and different characters and different actors. You got a sunrise shot for, the person having breakfast on the beach and you got to do, a version for a Spanish language, Asian language, English, French, for the Canadian markets. And you have to think about those kind of things nowadays. And a virtual production allows that repeatability that we don't get anymore. The other thing is that think about a lot of the places where one of the things that's really cool is that it's kind of wiping out process trailer stuff. Because they're going out and shooting plates or doing things, and they're not, you're not doing a towed vehicle with a crew of a guy like me controlling the irises on the camera as you drive through the city, going in and out of dark and light places. You don't have those anymore because basically they build what they want and they put, 4 grips on the back of it, and you actually cut your crew in half by, a production crew because you don't have 27 cop cars blocking the way and those kind of things. You don't think about all of that, but also think about Miller Creative, one of the companies I work with, does a lot for United Airlines. Working in O'Hare Airport requires a $50 million insurance policy just to walk on the tarmac. You have to do security and all kinds of other things that you can't do other way. Now, it's an airport. They can put people in the background using metahumans. They can have real stanchions and stuff in the shots. And you can actually see, the cost savings just in the production value because you have a crew that can handle it, but working on a virtual set with people doing, normal ticket taking, that kind of stuff that you have in movies and all of that, that's all built now. And that's a huge cost savings and a safety environment too. Think about explosions. Think about those kinds of things where somebody has to do something very dangerous. You can now have that on their screen and still get the reflections. Fire shots. I mean, the Dick Wolf shows here use, not virtual projection, but just LED screens for doing a lot of the driving stuff because it's easier to do for pickups and inserts. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on everywhere that we haven't even thought about. In the post-production world, which was last weekend, Sam Nicholson came on and was talking about the work that he'd done. He's done all the stuff with Blackmagic cameras and 12K Blackmagic cameras for shooting plates. And they actually hung 85-inch television screens outside a train window and connected them by servers. And rather than building an entire wall, they put up a display that was just big enough for the angle that they needed, and that served their purpose.
Cool.
And that's a cost savings that people, they went out and bought 30 televisions at Best Buy. It didn't cost it.
That's cheap.
A whole lot cheaper than a wraparound wall. I can tell you that right now. When you start talking about panels are $2,000 and $3,000 and $5,000, from between $2,000 and $5,000 each for a square meter. That's a lot. That gets really expensive really quickly.
Yeah, it really does.
That's super cool. That brought us right on to our hour. So
we don't have another 2 hours to talk. We could.
I guess we'll have to come back and do it again, guys.
We could.
Yeah.
But man, that was really good. I appreciate you guys. I know there's so much more we could talk about the future and how things have changed and where things are headed. But is there anything that, right at the end here, just you'd like to shout out or tell anybody about that you haven't already mentioned or want to send somebody to somewhere? Films, yeah. Okay, I think I found it. It is actually filmscapechicago.com. Gary,
yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, I'll paste that into the chat.
But I was actually pointing at Ryan and Ryan talking about Film Riot and that kind of stuff. I was giving him the go here. Yeah.
But I'll send it back.
Yeah. What
Yeah, check out those guys. They're more interesting.
Yeah, check them out. That's good
well,
stuff.
and the thing is, if you don't know about Film Riot, please look it up and do, because I do know about Film Riot. It's nice to finally meet you, Ryan.
Oh, thanks, man.
And know that there's resources for education everywhere.
Yes.
Matt and I talked last week at Post-Production World. It was kind of fun to jump on, and there's more of those coming. There'll be the remote production conference in February. We're going to talk about these kind of things. But know that there's learning resources around you everywhere. Get on, and while I'm not a fan of telling people to go to YouTube for everything, there's a lot of content on there. But if you want to learn about Unreal Engine, go to unreal.com. I mean, there is a massive amount. There's something like 300 terabytes of informational videos on Unreal and how to build things in the world and work with it on Macs or PCs. It doesn't matter what you build in. Basically everybody, just so you know, you have to render on Windows because NVIDIA does a whole lot better than AMD does in that world, in my personal opinion. But it's one of those things that you got to think about that. And Unreal offers a huge educational resource, and that's the place to start at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us this morning, taking time out of the day, and as always, I'd like to thank the audience as well for joining us today. We're doing this again, a different set with at 1 p.m. So come back a little later this afternoon for actually I can't recall off the top of my head.
It's 2 hours,
Resolve.
depending on what time zone you are.
We'll be talking about Resolve at 1 p.m. Pacific today. So come back, and we've got a whole mess of content coming this whole week, Tuesday to the end of the week. So busy. Stay tuned, and thanks you guys very much, and we'll see you all next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks, man.